AI is not magic. I think what's fascinating about where we are right now is when OpenAI released the beta version of ChatGPT. They can do things that they couldn't do before, but there are also things that we really shouldn't be doing with that. Security is paramount, trust is paramount. Working with AI agents, now you're exposing even more data to more entities. How do we keep everything safe, knowing that they are working for you and not for whatever company's best interest that they're working for?
If they don't develop more, they may lose clients. Do you see a bit of a threat for financial services firms?
The threat has always been there, but they have been very comfortable riding on the fact that it is really difficult to switch financial institution, to change your relationship. One of these days, bank will wake up and say, oh, wait a minute, this is not a good thing.
Welcome to the Pulse Check podcast. I have with me Theodora Lau. Theo, how are you today?
Very good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me. It's a great honor to have you because I saw that you're much more experienced in running a podcast than me. I only do this for a year. And you have a very, very exciting podcast. I'm sure we will mention it later. Of course, looking at your background, 30 years ago you joined telecommunication in the US, coming from Hong Kong. You have still family here you're visiting. So great opportunity, of course, to join me here. So you have gone all the way from telco, then also to fintech, huge background of experience, and you're also an entrepreneur similar to me with Unconventional Ventures. That's the company you currently run. I'm sure we will also hear about it. But before we go into this, I ask typically a question about what's something unique about you. Anything you can share?
Yes, I think, where do I start? Typically when people ask, Theo, can you introduce yourself? I think that's where I would start. I like to ask questions, hence the podcast, but I also like to ask questions and get myself in trouble. So there you go.
So I hope I will not get in trouble because I'm the one asking questions today. Of course, feel free to also ask me. No, thank you once again for doing this on your holidays, being in Hong Kong. And looking back at your impressive background and experience, before I start with then really going into the depth of some of the topics. What brought you into telco, and how does this then evolve into becoming basically book author and podcast moderator in fintech? Can you quickly elaborate on that journey?
Okay, summarize 30 years into one. I think the one thing I often tell people is that fintech happened to me. I think back then in 92, we didn't really have the word fintech. I was in telco. It was just opportunities. I graduated in engineering, and I was looking for work. My background was chemical engineering, if anything. So I was working in manufacturing. I was working in a spectrophotometer company that translates color into numbers. And it was absolutely fascinating. And then the .com era happened, for those of you listening who are actually old enough to remember the .com days, and the market crashed. Just so happened, telco was still hiring at that time. I ended up in telecom, and I never looked back. I spent 20 years in there, starting from landline, again, for those who were old enough to remember, all the way to wireless, to CLAX, which you can think of it as a MVNO version of landline services, to wireless, high-speed wireless, and then I had children. I took a short break. I came back out. I ended up in a health tech startup. Again, opportunity happened to me. A friend of mine asked, he said, hey, we are running health tech innovation for an NGO looking at healthcare for older adults. Are you interested? So, sure, why not? And spent a few years in there. And that, I would say, is my pivotal point from telco healthcare startup to where I am and have been sitting in the last 10 years, looking at, we often like to tell people, hey, you need to exercise right? To live longer. You need to eat healthy in order to get your health and live longer. We forget the one more important thing, which is really difficult, especially in the US, to live healthy and to eat healthy unless you don't have to worry much about money. The example I often give people is if you're working 3 shifts a day, back to back, you don't have time to think about going to get exercise. And chances are when you get off your 3rd shift at midnight, the only thing that stays open is a fast food joint. It's also really difficult to eat healthy when you live in areas that have less access to fresh food. It's very different, compared to Hong Kong. And all of these factors add to people not being able to live healthy, hence increase in healthcare costs, etc. And so at that moment when I realized, wait a minute, I think the fundamental issue that we have is we need to find ways to help people regain their financial well-being. And that was what started my journey into financial services and fintech, looking at how can we use technology to help people save better and make better money decisions.
That's a nice way to put it. So great story. Going into now some of the specific questions. And the first one, of course, everyone talks about AI, so we also have to. And it's also close to my heart, again, coming from an engineering background too. I was actually building some of the analytics on also the NVIDIA graphic chips almost 20 years ago. Back then, NVIDIA CUDA just came out about 19 years ago, I believe. And back then, I should have put all my money into NVIDIA, as we know today. But it's not surprising, of course, the development we've seen. And you followed this also for a long time. So it's not only a hype, it's a reality. But what do you see as opportunity and maybe also major pitfalls when it comes to AI, Gen AI in general?
I've been writing about AI for almost a decade now. I've been observing the technology, where it's going, and you and I both know it is not new, right? It's been around for quite a long time, and the concept of it started from the 1940s all the way to now. It's evolved. We've gone through multiple iterations of AI winters, AI summers. We got really excited about it, only to realize, wait a minute, the expectations were a little bit higher. We dialed it down and the cycle goes. I think what's fascinating about where we are right now is if we go back and look at what transpired about 2.5 years ago, almost 3 now, when OpenAI released the beta version of ChatGPT. That was the first time that people have access to the technology. They could play with it. They can see the outcome. They can do things that they couldn't do before, right? Very different than in the old days. Oftentimes, the deployment of technology is in the back end. We can't really see it. And so when you have something that is available to the mass and they can see with their own eyes what they can do with it, it becomes a huge phenomenon. And all of a sudden, we're like, oh, wait, what else can we do with that? Now, that is the opportunity part of it. Can we do more with it? Can you get more people to adopt the technology and reimagine new ways of living and working? The other side of it is not magic, right? AI is not magic. Fundamentally speaking, the tool has generative AI. For example, there are a lot of things we can do with it, but there are also things that we really shouldn't be doing with it. For example, when the tool was first released, there were engineers that was feeding the code to the tool. And not knowing that, by doing so, you're releasing your private data into the open world. So I think knowing that, understanding what the tool can do, and be mindful of the guardrails that we need to put in place and know what it can and cannot do, it's important, and it's the pitfall. If you look at the recent releases, right, from some of the big tech companies, I link it to the iPhone moment that we had back when the iPhone was launched. Back then, we were introduced to a new form factor, and we're like, wow, wait a minute, this is not a flip phone anymore. What else can it do? And I remember taking the phone to a business trip with me to Tel Aviv, right when the phone was released. I had no idea how much data it was using and how expensive it became. After a week I came back, I think I had like 300, 400 USD of roaming charges of data. All I was doing was just, oh, check this out. I can actually look at weather, right? It was very simple things we were doing. And look at how far we have come. Because what the iPhone had done was not just introducing a new form factor, it fundamentally created new industries for us. Being able to hail a car when you're in the street in the middle of Hong Kong, being able to pay people, split the bill using your phone, right, at the end of the meal, being able to check into a flight. All of these new things were enabled not just by the phone itself, but the ecosystem it has created, the entire ecosystem of new apps, new way of working anywhere and wherever you would like. All of that is enabled by mobility. The infrastructure of it is there, but is everything else on top of it? And if you do it in parallel with how we're thinking about artificial intelligence, could this be the jump starting point for us where we can reimagine money movement? Think about Anthropic when they released Claude for financial services recently. Perhaps we can now have new ways of doing financial analysis. Perhaps now we can have new ways of doing commerce, right? And that's why the big tech giants, Googles and the like, they're like, well, wait a minute, this is potentially upending how we're thinking about commerce and shopping. So what else would we see is the question mark, and that's also the opportunity.
Absolutely. Of course, again, coming from an engineering background, AI, I mean, back then we learned machine learning, stochastic models that were deterministic, and of course different to the Gen AI model where it's not deterministic, very built on large language models. I think what people may sometimes still not fully understand, and where there's also a bit of the threat is that, of course, it's only as good as the models are trained, and it's not a 1 or 0 answer, and that you cannot 100% trust on the answer you get. And when it comes to banking, trust is extremely important. That's something we always talk about in when it comes to AI in banking. So definitely both, of course, prescriptive AI, more the traditional classic AI that has been used in banking for the past 2 decades, but also now generative AI that is used now, where there is a bit more hesitance, especially of the big banks, exactly because of the trust topic, especially exposing it directly to customers. And given that you come from the US, where, of course, there have been some of the biggest tech companies coming from that launch all these large language models, what are some of the maybe use cases or trends you see when it comes to AI in banking? Particularly, you mentioned before that Claude has launched also their models for banking. What are some of the things you see?
I think a lot of the initial deployment we have seen so far, and I believe you see the same thing in here, if not even more advanced in Asia, and I'll get to that in a minute, is the use of AI and technology in customer service, right? Using it in the call center operations, being able to surface information for the call agent so they can respond faster. We have seen the likes of chatbots being deployed to serve customers who would rather chat with a bot than with a human agent. We've seen the use of it deployed to internal employees as creating an internal knowledge base for them to get information, to summarize documents, etc. So those are I would say the low-hanging fruit, right, of what we can use AI for. The more interesting use cases, actually, they happened in Asia, and it happened quite a few years ago. I remember back 2018, perhaps, in my first and last visit to Hongju. That was when I was in Alibaba, and they were talking about using their lending model, right, the 310 lending model, to dispense credit to micro entrepreneurs, and that was fascinating. And a lot of that is built on the availability of data that they have in the models they're running on to determine what kind of credit risk, right, is each small businesses and consumer can have. And those use cases are fascinating, and in a sense, if you can get the model to the extent that you don't expose your institution to high risk, I think it can potentially open the door to more credit for more people who need it and different ways of looking at it, right? And I think those use cases are more advanced in economies in Asia and in Africa than in the US. The other one, I was actually just talking to a friend of mine recently, is something that I knew about from a few years ago, use of AI in insurance, right? Being able to send the information back and get response back from based on the picture that you have, etc. So those use cases, I think they were used in other countries before we saw that in the US. I think the interesting part in the US is you see a huge split between the Silicon Valleys of the world, right? The tech companies of the world who are doing new things and releasing new products, oftentimes throwing things at a wall to see what stick, versus the more incumbent financial services industries, except the BFA, except the JPMs. A large part of the industry is still, I think a lot of them are struggling with, it's a legacy systems, right? And you have data in siloed. How do we clean that layer up so that we can actually layer technology on top of it? I think that's where we're struggling with more often than not. And one of the examples I often give to people is I do bank with a large global bank in the US. I had my consumer account that I've had with them for decades. I recently opened a business account with them a couple of years ago. In between then, I had a second consumer account. This was back then when we move across state line, you have to open a new business account, consumer account. So I had 3 bank accounts with the same bank. The only way for me to move money from my personal consumer account to my business account is to write a check. And it's fascinating when people look at, but you're in the US, why are you writing a check? Well, I am, because that's the only way I can move money. Either that or wire money. So we're still dealing with a lot of infrastructure-related challenges. And until we can solve that, it will be really difficult for us to layer technology on top of it.
So true. And it's interesting that in the US it's the same challenges as here. So we are not that different. No, absolutely. I mean, running a business and also having the personal account, I see exactly what you mean. It's so challenging. Opening business accounts in general, a very lengthy process. There's so many opportunities, of course, to improve that with AI. And brings me maybe to the next question that you also have, the that we talked about earlier, the one application in technology that you're most excited about. And I mean, I'll leave it up to you. It can be anywhere.
The one thing I would love to see, which I have not seen yet, is a true way for us to bring finance and technology together. I'm obsessed with the ability of using technology to something to help us reimagine how we manage and move money. And I look at things from a generational perspective, and that's influenced by my work at the NGO. I'm in my early 50s, way past half a century old. My kids remind me that. I have my parents who are getting older. The kids are teenagers, right? And I live far from my family. And so when we think of managing money, when we think of setting goals for money, when we think of personal finance, it's not really personal finance, because every single decision that I make with my finances impact my business, impact my children and their education, and impact my ability to take care of my parents as they get older, right? Financial caregiving is very much a part of Asian culture. And so when we think about all of the clusters of financial decisions I need to make, and the clusters of financial relationships that I have, and the if and then and what, there's no good way for me to bring all of those together, right? Yeah. I don't have a single entity that I can go to and say, hey, what is the best way for me to think about how to best save for myself before I have to retire? What's the best way for me to expand my business? At the same time, knowing that I need to save up $1 million for my kids' education, because it's $500,000 a pop for each child in the U.S. And at the same time, knowing that in the next 10 years, I would probably need to save up to take care of my parents, right? So all of these are conflicting demands and responsibilities. And from a people level, from a person level, I don't really have a good means to figure out exactly what's the best course to take. Much like when you hop into a car and you try to use a map to navigate where you need to go, and the map will tell you, hey, there is traffic up ahead. Perhaps you can take a different route, and intelligently help you navigate from point A to point B. I need that for my money. So I hope to see that, not just from my very personal need, but I would say for a lot of people who are in Alzheimer's generation.
Absolutely, and it's actually so simple yet so difficult when, of course, we understand the legacy in banks and insurance companies. But a holistic view for a full financial planning for an individual is basically what everyone is seeking for. And problems also include that a lot of the data, of course, is in various systems and in various different institutions, and also not with you yourself. I mean,
Absolutely.
That's where we should start. The data should be with the customer, with
who owns the data, right?
Exactly. And for example, starting with know your customer, the KYC onboarding. If you would have it on a blockchain readily available per fingerprint, you can say, hey, now you can access my data to onboard me. You have the source of wealth, all information you need, my credit score, whatever it is. I mean, that's another fascinating story. Of course, credit score, it's always tracked by companies that may or may not have all the right information about you. You cannot even verify it and so on. So we will bring back data more towards the client who can then share it as and when needed, and you're in control. Europe would say GDPR compliant. But most important, with having all the data, of course, really providing that holistic view, and work with 80% of all the top banks globally, and all the banks have the same challenge. I mean, especially when it comes to wealth management, where a lot of information is then with the wealth manager, the relationship manager, and they know you. And if you have someone who's working with you already since years as an ultra high net worth individual, then brilliant, he knows what you need. But especially if you're maybe on our levels, then you don't get that access, and they will change relationship managers frequently, and they will rarely remember you, and the cost to serve is too high, and then they just push products on you.
Yes.
So it all goes back to, of course, having the data, leveraging the data, and give you that comprehensive view. And I think AI will play a very significant role in this, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully, and security, right? And you touched on that.
Trust.
Security is paramount. Trust is paramount. When we do eventually enter in the world with AI agents, working with AI agents, now you're exposing even more data to more entities, right? How do we keep everything safe? And knowing that they are working for you and not for whatever company's best interest that they're working for.
What will be interesting is that now with Gen AI, the clients, the customers can educate themselves very quickly. So I, for example, had to look at insurance for my boy, 4-year-old boy now. And of course, immediately, of course, policy I get by PDF. It's very annoying. It's not nicely digital experience. And so I had to, of course, verify quickly with Gen AI to make a market benchmark, Hong Kong, APAC, global, and so on. And immediately I could compare and immediately direct to areas where maybe the agent didn't give me the best advice, and areas where it was also nicely fulfilled, and so on. And the same in wealth, of course, US with your retirement fund, where you can basically buy any stocks also in the market. If a bank wants to sell you a mutual fund with a lot of hidden costs, meanwhile you can shortly educate yourself and say, okay, I just buy an ETF and I'm better off. If the clients can do this, of course, also the banks and insurance companies have to do this, and the best, of course, in collaboration. Coming back, maybe, I don't know, we already moved on from AI, but still also in the US, I mean, that threat also for the banks needs probably to be there, that if they don't develop more, these big banks, to provide exactly that holistic view, they may lose clients. And there are tech companies that do at least part of the value chain of financial services too. I know that Apple, for example, has licenses in various states in the US. I'm not sure how far that goes, of course, but do you see a bit of a threat for financial services firms?
Oh, I think the threat has always been there. But I think they have been very comfortable riding on the fact that it is really difficult to switch financial institution to change your relationship. One of the underlying current that's been going on, there was a recent report that was released that talked about even if you are banking, quote unquote, with a primary bank, more than half of the other banking relationships that you have most likely are with someone else. So I think on average, a U.S. consumer has about 7 to 8 financial relationships. More than half of those are not with, the products are not with your primary bank. And so I think the threat has always been there. I look at myself, for example, I have my small business account where all the money comes in from the clients. I have my personal bank account that I use to pay bills, etc. But everything else, typically that place is only a place of orchestration. I look at it because I would put money then in my retirement account, which is outside of my bank. I put money in a small investing account, fund money. Again, that's outside. I send money to my kids as their allowance, weekly allowance, and that's also a fintech that's outside. So when you start seeing the funds dissipating from your primary bank, and I'm not the only one, a lot of people are doing the same thing, right? And so it's, even though they can say, well, you know, I've had Theo as a customer for 30 years, the nature of my relationship and the fund that I have with them has changed drastically in the last 10 years. And I hope, you know, one of these days, bank will wake up and say, oh, wait a minute, this is not a good thing. We can't just rely on the fact that we still have these customers for years because things have changed behind the scene.
Absolutely. I mean, when there's one good outcome, then it should be that there's a bit of a democratization of wealth, where also people without having millions having more access to the right financial advice. At the moment, we are pushed more products towards the mass affluent that we are in. But with AI, it should lower the cost to serve and give the banks the opportunity to also give us what we deserve.
Hopefully. And just don't give us a chatbot that says you can use it to find out how much money you've used for coffee last month.
Exactly.
That's really not useful.
Which is probably a bit too high for the two of us. But maybe to the last question, also coming back to what we discussed now the last 20 minutes, is if you would have the superpower to really change one thing in the world, like keep it broad for you, what would that be and why?
I would love the ability to bring people together. I know that sounds really broad, but that is one of the biggest reasons why I wrote my last book. And that's also one of the biggest reasons why I do what I do in the space. There's a lot of development and people with their thinking in tech. There's a lot of development in people thinking the way they think in banks. But there isn't enough that brings the two together and say, hey, we know you are used to this way of working. We know you're used to this way of working. Perhaps we can come together and find new ways that we can work together. Same as we are in the times where companies are competing against each other and regions are competing against each other. There's AI nationalism, if you will. I think the technology is so powerful that it will serve us as a humanity much better if we're willing to work together. It's fascinating how much I see blockchain development and Web3 being done in Hong Kong when I'm back here. But when I'm back in the US, I don't hear anything about what's going on here. Same as when I saw the development of Super App back here and in Asia back in 2016. When I brought it back to the US and we were saying, look, this is fascinating. It's coming from a tech company and it does all of these things and people literally live on the app. I got people staring at me. They're like, so what? Right? It's the so what part. We are okay with the status quo. We have what we have. Why do we need to look outside? And I think that's the part that we need more work to appreciate, where innovation can come from. It can come from everywhere, where great ideas, where things that can get better if we're willing to collaborate. And if I have the superpower, I would love to do more of that.
That's very beautiful to say. And I think you have, to some extent, that power, because again, you have roots here in Hong Kong in Asia, and you live in the US. And I would also love to see the two big forces coming closer, because there's a lot of research in China. There's actually more patents being really developed on a monthly basis than anywhere else. And there's, of course, amazing entrepreneurship in the US and research. So if we can bring the two together, that helps us. And I'm also here in the middle of the two, and love to see both of them come closer, and of course all the people in between, including also the Europe, as I'm Swiss. So really love to see that. And I think with your podcast you reach a big audience, and that's why I love that we bring this also together with an Asian, bit more Asian focus, but also global podcast, and your podcast that hopefully also reaches then everyone here in Asia. Maybe you can quickly also mention where we can find you, where the podcast is, and anything else you want to share.
Yeah, I live on LinkedIn, unfortunately, or fortunately. So you can just look me up on LinkedIn, Theodora Lau. And then the podcast is One Vision, FinTech Views. And it's been 5.5 years in running now. We talk to people from everywhere. People who have a good story, people who are doing innovation, people in entrepreneurship and fintech. So we love to talk to people. That's what we do. And then you can find my books on Amazon. The latest one is Banking on Artificial Intelligence, bankingonAIbook.com. So I'm out there.
Yeah, I've seen it. I've yet to order my book, of course, which I will do right after. And one vision, which also is beautiful, linking back to what you said, in terms of really bringing people together with your superpower. So I'm looking forward to this. So thank you for joining me. Of course, the Pulse Check podcast you find also on LinkedIn, on YouTube. Please follow us. And I hope that we find also a few subscribers in the US. And of course, we'll also follow yours and see how you do. And next time you come over, please visit us again, and I will hopefully also be able to once visit you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
so
coming.
much.
Thank you, Theo.